the famed Emerald Tablet, it talks about, it's only one page. It talks about many things. It does mention actually how to make the Philosopher's Stone. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is we're talking about plant medicines tonight, right? And in order to understand some of these compounds, some of these allies a little bit better, it's nice to understand what they stand on top of. And we're just going to be touching on a few of those things and then get more into it. It is truly certain and most veritable. All is a projection and multiplication of one universal mind. That which is within corresponds to that which is without, and that which is without corresponds to that which is within in order to facilitate the total agency of one mind. The one creates life, and to evolve, life transforms matter by projecting desire through the intent, word, and will of one mind. The all and all in all remains all. Vibration is the electric pulse of life. The friction of charge and discharge, male and female, generates the rhythm of organic light. Polarity sustains the cycles of nature and activates perception. Through vibration, matter is sustained, containing within it three essential attributes. Matter is transformed and separated through the vehicle of five forces. Life grows within the womb of wisdom and is animated through inspiration. Life is received and revived in matter. Its seed is the star. Its spirit does not wet the hand. Its mother is the earth. It is the origin of all, the consecration of the universe. From it all things emerge, and unto it all things return. Its evolution is perfected if it is fixed into physical form. Separate the subtle from the crude. Gently and with great ingenuity, it rises from earth to heaven and descends again back to earth, combining within it the power of the above and the below, the within and the without. The unaware becomes aware, the unconscious becomes conscious, the unsensed becomes sensed. Thus you receive the key to the kingdom of all kingdoms. All obscurity will be clear to you. This is the greatest force of all forces because it overcomes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. In this way, the universe creates. From this will come infinite inspiration and application because this is the pattern. I have explained the entire operation of the star. So we start with, is there anything outside of everything? And that's a weird question. It's kind of loaded. No. There's everything, right? So we have a one. It's the all and all in all that permeates through everything, right? Next slide. Then the one oscillates. That is one ability, and that is to think or dream, whatever you want to call it. So we have positive, negative, charge, discharge, Shakti, and Shiva. All the time, always going on. If that ever stops, everything stops. Period. So we have the one, we have the two, so we have duality, we have polarity, we have friction. And that's what makes everything perceivable, right? If this chair wasn't vibrating, I couldn't perceive it. If we weren't vibrating, we couldn't perceive each other. Nothing could be perceived. Let's go to the next one. So this kind of breaks down that. So we're getting into some more correspondence here. And this is very important when doing ceremonial work and also wanting to tap into some of your own studies, commune with nature. It can be very helpful. So we have correspondence here with the more masculine or positive or charge and discharge. Now, when we say negative, it gets demonized a lot of the time these days, but that's the yin principle. That's the Divine Mother, and that's who I worship, so don't dig on her. We have we have correspondence here with the east, the south, the west, the north, and then the east again. So it's doing that over and over and over, right? So as the sun rises, right, it's rising in the east. We get a charge throughout the day, and then we go into our yin practice as it hits the west over here, and then it comes back around to the east, just like that. Next one. This is some more correspondence with that. So we have some seasons that line up and also the elemental correspondence. So as the sun rises in the east, that's where air corresponds to air. Not literal air, but the alchemical air. Then we in the south, and then in the west, and then in the north. So we have some different correspondences there with, it starts with air, and then fire, and then water, and then it goes to earth. And there are different properties of all these elements. But then again, this all still corresponds to the two, the cycles of nature. And anytime you attend a temple ceremony anywhere in the world, doesn't matter with what nation, what tribe, they will be using a system that works with 4 directions, 4 elements, whether or not they're using effigies, goddesses, gods, different deities to guard each of these entryways into a temple space so that you can travel more smoothly and that's a more grounded experience. We have a right eye and a left eye. So we have some duality there. There is, at least in the Eastern tradition and also in Kemet, which is now known as Egypt, there are some differences between the eye of Horus and the eye of Ra. One correlates to emotional center with the moon, and one correlates to logical center, which is the sun. So we have also another yin and yang situation there. Next one. So now we have the 3. So the original Trinity, this predates all the Abrahamic religions. The alchemical sulfur, mercury, and salt. In East India, it's also referred to as the Mahagunas. It's Raja, Sattva, and Tamas is the other terminology, but same thing applies. In more modern contexts, we would call it the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit, I guess, over there. And that's some more correspondence that we work with. So how this works is the one is oscillating, right? It allows matter to be perceived. Within matter, there are 3 essentials within all matter. Everything. Everything has 3 of these aspects to it. We'll get more into in a little bit. But with most things, how it gets reflected as an essential oil for the soul. Then we have liquor or a spirit for the mind. And then we have alkali or salts. Now this is the foundation of actually modern pharmacy. How it started is it used to have all these 3, but now, even if you look at a bottle of Advil, it contains an alkali and an acid. So it just has those 2, but it doesn't have a spirit anymore. It hasn't for hundreds of years. But the original pharmacies used to prepare what were called spagyrics back in the day. So that was in Europe. And there were other terminology for it well before then. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, alchemy got banned in Europe, except for in the Czech Republic. Thanks, King Rudolph. Next slide. So, yep. 3 aspects of the one. All things have these 3 things in them. Oh, and then is the laptop plugged in? Might want to plug that in. I think it's giving a little bit of a battery notification. So another way to also look at these is, at least among telestics, so that's technically what I am. We're a son of earth in starry heaven. My Holy Trinity is freedom, truth, and beauty. And as far as I'm concerned, if you have those 3 things, you don't technically need religion or anything else, but it does combine well with any faith, structure, or religion that you may have. All right, so the soul is the sulfur, right? So it's the actuating cause. When you, who here works with essential oils? Have you ever smelled any of them, even from across the room? Yeah. Awesome. That's what I want to see. More hands up. Very good. Most of the essential oils out there, I'm not a fan of. A lot of them are artificial, or just not the best practice with extracting them. But you notice, say if you smell an essential oil of cinnamon, you know it's cinnamon right away. It's its characteristic. It's its fingerprint. It's the actuating cause of that plant. It's its signature. It's what makes it what it is. So that's the soul. Then we also have the mercury. So this is the mind. It's also the spirit. So there is a distinction, at least in some of the alchemical terminology, between the soul and the spirit. If you look at the etymology of the word spirit, it means the mind, technically. So when you go to a liquor store, it says wine and spirits. So that's what it's referring to here. So that's where we get into the mind aspect of the one. It's thinking, it's dreaming, and it allows through that action for abstracts to become concrete, to have a body, to be perceived, to be physical, material, right? This is another diagram. So this breaks down at least some of the dosha system. Anyone here fan of Ayurveda in the East? Fantastic. So this breaks down our three essentials, the Raja, Sattva, and Tamas, with elemental correspondence. So what happens is all matter contains these three things. To transform those three things, we have 5 different forces. In the West, they usually say 4, but I'm siding with the East on this one. We have 5. So we have Pitta, Vata, and Kapha. So this is where the dosha, or is what it's translated to, defect, occurs within any matter. So if you're more heavy in one particular area, like you're more pitta leaning, you can work with certain herbs for that. In Ayurveda, one of the standard practices is to work with a sattvic diet, which is usually pretty well balanced. Sattvic herbs make some of the best medicines, but then it can be nice to use little bits of other herbs in there to bring balance. And everyone's constitution is a little different. So what's cool about these systems, this pattern, is that if you learn it and you apply it, you can see how it can best fit you. Because not necessarily everyone's going to know what's best for you all the time. So it's nice to kind of take the reins on your own destiny there. So we have the 5 forces. We have fire, air, water, and earth. We also have ether right there in the center. And what's cool is how most matter transforms itself. It usually follows this progression. It's typically referred to by modern physicists as strong nuclear force and weak nuclear force are actually the more volatile on top, more masculine principles there. Then we go into water, and then we go to earth. So this is how generally matter transforms itself over time. This is more stable. Now there is also the potential for ether, at least as we understand it in the East, with vril, with orgone, with prana, with tantra, whatever you want to call it, for this element to become any of these at any time. And this is where this connection happens from fire to earth. This is where you can see anomalies like shape-shifting, disappearing, really woo stuff. So if you're working on that stuff, I don't recommend doing it in public eye. Just be aware of that axis there. Next one. This is a little bit more of a breakdown. In a lot of European alchemy, they would use what's called humoral medicine, the humors, which I prefer Ayurveda. I prefer the dosha system. But this provides some more of the dynamics that happens here. So we have fire, air, water, earth, but then these transits between them have different dynamics. So up top, of course, we're going to have hot. Down below, we're going to have colds. So there's motion and there's energy happening there. And there's some humidity here because there's water, but then there's heat up there. What do you do when you have water and heat? Makes steam. Makes things humid. And over here, we have dry and space, at least with the fire to earth connection. So that's why things can get a little weird, pop out of nowhere, be very sudden. Now, there is additional correspondence with each of these elements. It talks about, there's the truth, there's thought, there's emotion, and this is all very helpful in any type of temple or psychedelic practice with understanding the mind, because the soul is usually more fiery. The mind is actually split between these two right here. And does anyone here distill alcohol? Anyone ever done that? It's okay if you have or haven't. There won't be a test, don't worry. So with ethanol specifically, there's an interesting anomaly called an azeotrope. So what happens when you ferment something that you're turning into alcohol or a spirit? You can distill that over and over and over again. The maximum potency you're going to get it to is 190 proof. No matter how many times you distill it, you won't be able to get it to 200 proof. You won't get it to 100% unless you use some tricks to get it past there. And when it becomes 200 proof, that's when it becomes what's called anhydrous, which means there's no water in it. Which is kind of interesting with this axis here and also correlating to the mind when we're talking about thought and emotion. We want to be aware of our emotions. We want to be aware of the subconscious, because the subconscious technically controls a minimum of about 90% of our actions, our thoughts, our patterns, all throughout the day. So we want to make friends with it. We also want to volatilize it so we can actually bring it to conscious light, so we can actually look at it and have some awareness with what we're doing and what our motivations are. So with all of these patterns, you can work it into your various preparation or integration practices, meditation, breathwork, just getting to know the emotional side of yourself and also the logical side, and bring them together because they're friends. They're meant to get along. And here we have some additional correspondence with the archetypes of mind and also the chakra set. So this gets into some of the metallic realm as well. We're going to touch on that briefly today before we get to plants. But we have, of course, we started our root, go all the way to the crown. All of this has planetary correspondence that goes up the spine. In, Tantra and Kundalini, two serpents sit here, and they rise and they fall, and you can do different flushing techniques. It's definitely good to be part of a lineage if you're doing that type of work, because it can be it's amazing, it's beautiful, it's very transformative, and it's also nice to have some solid ground and a spotter when you're doing it. We also have some additional correspondence here with platinum and antimony. Those are some of my favorite metals, but we can maybe touch on that later. Now, in the zodiac, all of the zodiac actually refer to laboratory methods. And even if you look at some of these symbols, they resemble laboratory equipment. So where did all these different chemists from around the world, whether or not they use these symbols, where did they learn these processes to apply in a lab setting? Well, they learned it from nature. So that's where we get the zodiac symbols. Each of those then have a planetary correspondence and elemental correspondence. So this is just other nodes to track there. Because the ultimate chemist, medicine maker, teacher is nature. Period. She's unfuckwithable. We have some correspondence here with, as within, so without, as above, so below. From even to the cellular structure to the stars, to the celestial bodies above, there is correspondence. There is a link. There's patterns that are identical. It's really cool. And we have the alchemical wedding. So that's the wedding of the alkali and the acid, and also the creation of the philosopher's stone. Next one. And we have 4 realms. We're mostly focusing on plants tonight, but the reason why I brought all this up is so that you can know what giants we're standing on, and also even the plants are standing on. We have the metallic realm here, which is also known as the immortal realm or the planetary realm. It gets amazing here. It's very potent, very powerful, singular correspondence. 1 metal equals 1 planet. Here with mineral, we're getting, this is very fixed, the least volatile, right? Because metals are around for millions and millions of years, just chilling. When we get into mineral, it becomes a little bit more volatile, and the correspondence opens up. So maybe we'll have something where there's a couple planets in its correspondence. Then we get more volatile, we get into the plant realm. So all plants actually have, just like we do, full correspondence with that chakra set that I was showing you earlier. And then we have animal, which is the most volatile. And we as humans are on the very tippy top because we're a restless bunch. That's cool, because then we can walk around, pick stuff up. We have thumbs. We can do all kinds of cool stuff and interact with all of these realms. Now, in order to work with any one of these, it is ideal to at least check in with all of them. So if you're working with plant medicine, right, there's not a single plant medicine ceremony that you'll go to where there aren't animal totems. There's going to be animals involved. There's also most likely going to be some gems or rocks that contain metals in them. So no matter what you do in any capacity, you will be interacting with all of these realms all the time, which is awesome because they help each other out, help keep things grounded, and help keep things moving. Nullus in verba means, well, you can interpret it a few ways, but it can mean on the word of no one, take no man's word, or you can take it to mean see for yourself. So this is where we get the scientific method here. And with potential journeys, if you're curious about them, it is best to eventually see for yourself. There's only so much that can be quantified or explained. There are some experiences that you just kind of have to be there for. And that's where discernment can protect you going into that, to make sure it's in your best interest, so that way when those opportunities do arise, that you can see things for yourself. And we have a lovely, lovely Isis here, some blue lotus. So we're getting more into some of the mechanics of medicine, how some things are prepared. Most of the medicine on the planet has been prepared through simple water extraction, right? Like various teas. So ayahuasca technically is a tea, a very powerful tea, but it's extracted with water, concentrated, prepared. Before any type of sacrament or medicine, whether you're in Kemet, India, Central America, South America, something helpful to work with is various perfumes or incense. In Kemet, or in ancient Egypt, they saw perfume as the ultimate offering to divinity. The gods love really pretty smelly shit. Just love it. Because it's awesome. It's nice to smell it. And it's one of the most prized offerings to give up to divinity and also to prepare the body. When I was doing ayahuasca training, I would actually cover my entire body with rose hydrosol and rose oil. It was just like fucking rose bouquet, just offering myself up to the vine. It's pretty fun. Or et labora means pray and work. So throughout the entire process, whether or not it's the medicine maker, carrier, practitioner, or anyone who's ingesting that, there's ideally an element of prayer, and there's always a little bit of work involved. So with a medicine practitioner, if you're getting good medicine from someone, they are praying the entire time they're working on that, whether it's meditation, mantra, whatever you want to call it. They're using their intent, their focus to work on themselves and also work what they're working on. If they're brewing ayahuasca, they're going to be singing Icaros basically the entire time, or giving it offerings, giving it mapacho smoke or various incenses to bless it, charge it with intention, with song. And every lineage has their own twist, and then also each individual practitioner has their own special sauce. So this is just something to be aware of with finding someone who's compatible with where you want to go, with what you want to do. With not just the medicine, but what type of energy that they carry, what their intent is. Maybe you want to work with someone who's a little bit softer, or where it's a more gentle experience. Some people just want to be thrown in the deep end with some really, really heady medicine. And either way is okay. Like, neither one is right or wrong. It's just something to be aware of. Here we have a diagram also of the moon cycle. So this is very important in, at least with mine, this is more formatted for my practice. I primarily work with faces of Durga and Chandi, but here we have Kali, Durga, and Lakshmi. And all around the world, regardless of where you go, you will find similar patterns of a trinity of the mother, the divine mother, in correlation to the moon cycle. I personally prefer starting work just after the new moon and also on the full moon. I also love working with Kali. She's not everyone's jam, but I love her. I love all three forms of her. My main form that I work with is Durga here. But depending on what your constitution is, you might notice that it's better to start things just after a new moon. Or maybe you notice, like, Lakshmi is really cool. She's really sweet. She also loves giving people gifts. So it can be nice to concentrate more of your work around the full moon. Depending on what you're looking for, there's not a right answer, but that's a way where you can customize things for your own best benefit and also keep things as smooth as you possibly can. Now, with at least the alchemical preparation, this is just a quick diagram here that shows different bioavailability. This is not doing just simple water extraction, but this is when we have just an essential oil. It's only active for 3 hours. When we have an essential oil spirit, it becomes active for 24 hours. When we have all three essentials, including the alkali salt, it is active for 72 hours. What this means is that, especially in the application of microdosing, whether or not it's with a psychedelic herb or not, you're able to really take the minimum viable dose, and it's immediately available on contact to the cells. It never needs to reach your digestive tract. Just the cells just soak it up. So this can be a really great way, when medicines are prepared this way, to also get to know an herb. So even something like ayahuasca or some of these headier plants that are very powerful, very psychedelic, and very psychoactive, you can work with it in microdose form just to become acclimated with it first before you dive in really deep with it. It can be a nice warm-up for whatever journey you want to go on. And there we have a bit of a diagram with at least 3 essentials coming in contact with the cell. A little bit of sound correspondence if you're into waveforms and audio files. And we're going to talk briefly about Mercury. So Mercury is an archetype that is all over the place. So we have the days of the week. Wednesday. Has anyone here seen American Gods? Okay. So there's Mr. Wednesday, right? There's Odin. Same with Shiva in the east. Same with Hermes Trismegistus. Same with Mercury. Same dude. Same archetype. That also can have some interaction with the mind, of course, because it's called Mercury. But these are some really powerful archetypes to work with when you're wanting to cause change in your life, and also if you're wanting to pray, if you're in deep, powerful experiences, working with some of these archetypes can be quite transformative, and they have your back. So let's talk about plants, my favorites. We're going to first start with Blue Lotus. Has anyone here worked with Blue Lotus before? Fantastic. So with this one, as we were talking about at the beginning, you want to be very careful with sourcing with Blue Lotus, because a lot of the Blue Lotus that's produced, farmed, has blood on it. It's done with slave labor. But there are plenty of farmers out there who do get paid well. Me and a few of my business partners work with them directly and even distill oil on site there. Make sure that they get paid. This flower was used in all of the royal rituals and ceremonies in Kemet for basically since it started. Maybe before even the Egyptians were there, because they kind of inherited their alphabet. It's in everything. It's really wonderful for dream work. That is a big part of plant medicine and shamanism, is accessing the dream state and doing work in the dreams. That's a great way to also prepare and integrate from doing really serious ceremony work, because you can be in the dream state. And our dreams, our subconscious is more running the show. If you can practice lucid dreaming, you can interact with it more. It also allows us to digest, say, unprocessed thoughts or unprocessed emotions, which is just going to help you prepare or integrate that much more easily. And you don't have to just work with Blue Lotus. There's various dream herbs. There's valerian root is really great. There is, There's a few African dream herbs or root barks. Selene capensis is another one. But yeah, something that's nice and relaxing. Before going to bed, and also when you wake up, is where the subconscious and conscious mind are talking to each other the most. And that's where you can actually make the biggest impression. That's why it can be very powerful to write a gratitude list before you go to bed or when you wake up, or affirmations at that time. Because that's when those two are communicating with each other. So that's a great way to plant seeds, is working with some type of an herb or a practice where you're having some communication between the waking life and the dreaming life. And the best way to do that is by working on either end of that. So right before you go to bed or right when you wake up, do a bit of journaling. Maybe have a dream journal. Write down some stuff that you're grateful for. Write down potentially affirmations or frame or what your accomplishments were that day. Just so you can continue to build trust between those two aspects. You want the subconscious and conscious mind to trust each other, especially if you're doing stuff like this. We have sacred tobacco. The spirit of spirits. Anyone here work with tobacco or ceremonial tobacco? Fantastic. Anyone here worked with hape? Awesome. Happy birthday. It smells like home to me. So yeah, with Mapacho, he's the spirit of spirits. If you are going to work with other plants, it is good to develop a relationship with tobacco. Now, you don't need to smoke it or also blow hape up your nose to do that. You don't actually have to ingest it to do it. Even just having it in proximity to you is a really great thing. There's a lot of nations there's a few nations that actually forbid women, if they're menstruating, to sit with ayahuasca. I don't agree with that. However, there are protocols that many other nations have developed where a woman, if she is menstruating, will just wear mapacho on her. So it's a protection spirit. So it allows definitely the womb space at that more sensitive time to have more energetic protection, more nourishment at that time. And also for any type of, whether you want to call it ritual, sorcery, whatever, having a relationship with Mapacho is very important because he is the spirit of spirits. He talks to all of them. All the plants, fuck with this guy. So if you want homies in the plant realm, establish a good relationship with this guy. And again, you don't have to smoke it, and also be aware that it is a very powerful, and nicotine is addictive. But we do have nicotine receptors. It can also be used, it gets more into the poison pass stuff, as I'll talk about later on. But nicotine can be used as a poison, but it can also be used as an antidote to other poisons. Because we have nicotine receptors, we have such a high affinity for this guy. And I don't think this will ever happen to any of you guys, but if you ever get slipped with poison sometime and you weren't expecting it, you can load your system with Mapacho and with nicotine. And since our receptors have such a high affinity for this, the other alkaloids can't bind. It's all taken out by nicotine. Useful trick in a bind. Hopefully you never have to use it. Next one. We have mushies. I love mushrooms. They're so smart. So there are a lot of course, psilocybin is getting mentioned a lot these days. A lot of it grows wild all over the place. This specific strain is called resins. Now, something to keep in mind, as we were talking about with some of the sustainability at the beginning, with how medicines are prepared, and one of the distinctions between how a lot of practitioners like preparing medicine and how it was originally and what's happened in more the last 2 centuries is most pharmacology has become isolates, like a single compound that you take, and that's also why there are so many side effects with all these drugs, because what's really cool about plants is they have what's called an entourage effect. So there's not just one active, there are several. Why is this? Well, there can be some actives in some plants that are less desirable than others, but in the right amounts, they actually counteract the side effects if they're prepared properly. There's a major intelligence with all these plants. So for instance, with resins, it has an endogenous form of niacin in it, just a tiny amount, not like a niacin flush. But what's cool about that, especially for microdosing, if you're working with mushrooms, it's good to have a tiny bit of niacin in there, especially if it came in the plant with it, because what will that do? It will circulate neurogenesis compounds. Neurogenesis meaning it can regrow nervous tissue, which mushrooms have been scientifically proven to do. It will circulate that through your whole nervous system. So if someone's getting off of SRIs or SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, right? What happens with those it's a very dirty trick that those medications play, because anything in the body, any receptor that doesn't get used, atrophies. So that's why it's so hard to get off of those compounds. So if you want to get your serotonin receptors back, one of the best ways to do that is microdosing mushrooms. And it can regrow those sites. Will they necessarily be the same as they were? Not necessarily, but they'll be there, and you can receive serotonin, and you won't be so sad all the time. Also keep in mind, the bulk of your serotonin receptors are in your digestive tract. So eat good food and take care of your tummy. Don't have leaky gut. Because that's how we stay happy. Next one. We have ayahuasca. Man, yeah, she's beautiful. So one of the scientific terms for ayahuasca is Banisteriopsis caapi, because it grows in the shape of a banister, in the shape of a double helix. She is seen as one of the many faces of the Divine Mother, a great access point for communing with divine femininity. There are several colors of her. The most popular brews tend to have the white and the yellow, which are a bit more gentle, a little bit easier on the tummy. So it can be a good place to start there if you are interested in ayahuasca. She also, with ayahuasca, the brew, What's fascinating about that tea, if you want to call it that, or medicine, is that it's always been known to at least have 2 ingredients, if not 3. One is a vine that is psychoactive on its own. It doesn't have the tryptamines in there, so you're not necessarily going to see the same visuals. But it does have an activator that allows other plants that have DMT in it to become orally active. Typically, you have to smoke DMT for you to have an experience with it. If you were just to eat DMT, you wouldn't really have a psychedelic experience unless you smoked it or ingested some of the vine first or with it. So there's that symbiosis there of those two. That's been going on. I mean, some archaeologists say like, they dated off of the oldest pottery shards that they found, and I think they dated it only like 5,000 years. But honestly, people have been drinking ayahuasca for tens of thousands of years. I'm going to side with the tribes on this one. Really beautiful work, typically done at night. It's typically done at night. And there are ways to prepare the body and work with other herbs that get along with not just this plant, but any of these plants. I mentioned mapacho before. It's good to have various relationships with others or companion plants. Anytime I work with ayahuasca, I always have mapacho on me. Always, even if I'm not going to smoke it, because mapacho is her lover. Now, it sounds kind of weird. Plants have kind of a romantic or tantric relationship. But some of the most intense and amazing experiences I've had were working with ayahuasca and mapacho together. The smokes are very important with ayahuasca. Having some type of mapacho tobacco there and having gentle incenses. You don't want to overwhelm smelly senses, but it's a very important way to hold the container, provide offerings to the various allies that you're working with, and also keep things moving in yourself. Makes it so it's not as static. There can be more peace in the body when you do this. The most brews of ayahuasca are prepared over several weeks. It can be done in a weekend. Usually there are several pulls with tea, and then there's a reduction down until it's very thick. And the flavor can change. Even if you have the same brew, the flavor can taste very different from time to time that you drink it, even if it's 2 nights in a row. Sometimes it can taste very sweet. When I first started drinking ayahuasca, it tasted like molasses. And then it started tasting very bitter. And then it went very sweet again. Everyone's a little bit different. Now, when working with ayahuasca, I definitely recommend having rose around you, whether it's rose oil, roses, working with that flower. She really likes that flower for whatever reason, so that can be great. Breathwork, again, is a great way to prepare the body, whether it's holotropic, whether it's kundalini. You can even use the Wim Hof method. Doesn't matter. All of it can be very helpful. Now we have Acacia. Acacia, I try not to play favorites. She's definitely one of my favorites. She is seen, I would say she's one of ayahuasca's sexy sisters from the East. And she is seen as the original Holy Grail. So the Telestics would work with her as a sacrament. She also makes appearances in all the different holy texts, whether it's before Abrahamic religions or after. The burning bush that Akhenaten, or as people call him Moses, talked to in the Bible was Acacia. She has a few tryptamines in her. She does have NN-DMT. She has a few others as well. And what the Telestics at least would do is they would have initiations to take a breakthrough dose, stand on 2 feet, and keep their eyes open the whole time. Kind of hardcore. Really, really cool. And what they would do with this is a lot of people will talk about when they go into psychedelics or ceremony, like they're going somewhere out there. It's always out there or something like that, right? It's actually not. It's right here all the time. And that's one of the big things that Acacia illuminates, is that it's always going on. One of the perks of Acacia is that she never tells a lie. She can only tell the truth. That can come with some bitter pills sometimes. But she's a great teacher. And she makes it very hard for anyone to lie to themselves. So that's also one of the other reasons why she's a very desirable ally. Her artistry, unparalleled. Ayahuasca's very gifted as too. Both Acacia and Ayahuasca are without a doubt my two favorite comedians ever. This one. And we have Huachuma. Some call him San Pedro. Man, I love him. So cool. Has anyone seen Huachuma or San Pedro when it's flowering in person? Awesome. So out of each of these nodes, he's very resilient, very fast growing, and also when it comes to sustainability, it's probably better to work with Huachuma for a while first before you dive in with peyote, because peyote takes 30 years to mature. It's a tiny little cactus that grows on the ground, has one flower out of it. It takes 30 years. This guy grows like crazy. Grows like wildfire. It's awesome. And one of the cool things with his resilience, each of these nodes where they're the spines, you can take a cutting, you can plant it in the ground. Either a shoot, a flower, or a root can come out of it. It's very resilient. Basically, the only way to kill them off is root rot. So if you're cultivating it at home, just make sure you have good drainage. With a lot of the work that ayahuasca does, it can be very introspective, right? We're going into more of that yin state, the receptive state, that observing, working with the subconscious. With father, some people call him grandfather as well, or uncle, we're taking some of that work that we did the night before and bringing it into the external world. Huachuma can still be very introspective. When the conquistadors came to Central and South America, they were first given ayahuasca. It scared the shit out of them. They hated it. Then they were given Huachuma. And they thought they had discovered the keys to the gates of heaven. So they rechristened him as San Pedro, Saint Peter, who's known to hold the keys to the gates of heaven. And then they killed all the Huachumeros. Any man, woman, and child that they could find. They destroyed them. Why is that? Because the Huachumeros didn't need a middleman. So one of the big lessons of Father is that you don't have to have a middleman. You have the plug. You can tap in directly. You don't need someone always ordering you around what to do, telling you what to do. He can be, I would say he's one of the ultimate surgeons when it comes to the plant realm. The animal correspondence that he has is the deer and the hummingbird. So if you're wanting to work with cactus, there's also the same animal totem for peyote as well. If you're working with cactus, it's good to work with deer and hummingbird totems. This will open you up to more of his signature, the precision, the vibration. When you work with mescaline, which is the main active ingredient in here, it feels very dreamy, very vibrational. You might kind of feel like a hummingbird flying around. You can also be laying on your back, but it still feels maybe like a waking dream that you're having. Very powerful. Peyote also has mescaline. But again, as I was talking about earlier, right? A lot of the peyote is technically endangered now. It's sort of coming out of it, but mostly endangered. A lot of it was over-harvested in the 60s and 70s because what people were doing, they would either eat the buttons, which is great because you're getting the full spectrum effect, but a lot of chemists were taking it and extracting and isolating just the mescaline, and they would throw the rest of it away. One of the beauties of peyote is it has far more than just mescaline in there. There are hundreds of active compounds. Hundreds. They're fascinating and beautiful and still belong with the mescaline in that plant. One of the cool things about Huachuma is you can still work with that mescaline signature in a way that's sustainable and get to know that first before diving in with peyote if you have that opportunity arise. If you do, beautiful. Let's see. What else on this guy? Does anyone have questions so far? I want to make this more interactive. Anyone having questions? Everyone's very quiet. Is there anyone who has worked with Huachuma before? Hell yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned compound, something or other.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
So a compound medicine means that it has more than one ingredient or more than one herb in it when it's prepared. So like ayahuasca, for instance, is very rarely just the vine. It usually has chacruna for the DMT, or sometimes they'll use mimosa. Some lineages use acacia, like at least where my training was, right? Then there are some where it's just best to take it alone, right? With Huachuma, in some areas, especially in high altitude areas where Huachuma is being consumed, I know this girl gets a lot of heat, but there is rarely ever a Huachuma ceremony without some form of mama coca in there. Mama coca is one of the fastest altitude sickness cures. So usually they'll have like a tea with a mama coca or mambe, which is a powder form. And mama coca is actually one of Huachuma's lovers. So just as mapacho and ayahuasca kind of have a thing going on, Huachuma and mama coca, and also Huachuma and brugmanja or datura. They're like that.
And poppy and cannabis. Datura is toxic.
Yes, it can kill you. It can definitely kill you very quickly. But we'll get into that in a little bit. But it can also be used to make some of the best medicines. So a lot of nations, not just in North and South America, there's also, so datura is actually used as offerings to Shiva as well, out in India. It's one of the fastest asthma attack cures if you smoke it. Don't eat it. But if you burn it, it burns off what are called tropane alkaloids. So that's the stuff that can kill you very easily. It burns it off, but it actually helps the respiratory system if it is burned and smoked. So if you're having issues just with the respiratory system, things getting stuck, that's a great way to have a natural nature inhaler of sorts to help with that.
Since we're here in Santa Barbara, what about ginseng weed?
That's datura. Yep.
Can you connect that compound
Mm-hmm.
directly to these?
No. So with me personally, so I've definitely gone deep down the poison path train and actually did a lot with. We'll get into it. Let's go actually to the next slide. Let's see if she's next up. Brugmanja. Here we go. Here's my girl. So this is another cousin of datura. So brugmanja and datura are very similar, chemically speaking. They're both forms of deadly nightshade. The oldest ayahuasca brews actually usually had brugmanja in it. And there's still plenty of brews out there today that still have it. I don't recommend drinking those, though, if you don't have a high tolerance to nightshade. So just be aware. These are questions to ask the practitioner to make sure, as we were talking about earlier, always make sure you know that your practitioner knows what's in their medicine. That's like rule number one. You want to know what's actually in there, and you want to know that they're willing to talk to you a bit about it. They don't have to disclose all their special mojo or prayers that they put in or share all the songs with you, but it's good to, at least chemically speaking, know what's in there, because that way you can actually know if there's interactions. If you're on medications, you want to make sure to not be taking things that can cause a serotonin reaction, because serotonin reactions can be deadly. Or other things, like if you're having heart problems and then you work with a psychedelic like, say, Iboga, if you're taking a flood dose, you can get arrhythmias. So you want to be mindful of making sure that there's a good fit with whatever medications you're on and what your constitution is, so you can find a good ally to travel with you. With these, I wouldn't call brugmanja or datura psychedelic by any means. They're technically deliriants / poisons. And they aren't really used for tripping. They're used for straight up sorcery, Very powerful stuff. I've had some tolicheros are pretty thin on the ground. I've had some bad run-ins with them. I've had some great run-ins with them. Something to be aware of also if you're in Central and South America. You want to be careful of scopolamine. That's actually something that is good to be aware of. And with some crime syndicates, sometimes they'll use it to spike people. Now, what's interesting about the tropane alkaloids, specifically scopolamine, is it triggers a total parasympathetic response, which means you can be completely under someone's hypnotic control. A little scary. So you just, want to be mindful. If you're in different areas, to just be mindful of what you're drinking. And also not demonize the plants. So mostly what happens is it's usually tourists that get tricked, typically, and also even locals. There's a lot of horror stories out there. And there's been stories of, say, people moving everything out of their house when they're in a trance. And then they go to their landlord the next day and they're like, why is all my stuff gone? And they're like, well, you moved it out with a few guys. So this is where some of the medicine and psychedelic stuff can get a little dark. Because while this can be used for incredible medicine making, it can also be used to hurt people. It's good to go into some of these containers understanding that not all the practitioners out there are going to be the best option or working in integrity. But there are some amazing medicine practitioners out there. There are. It's changed my life. It's changed so many people, so many lives of people that I care about. There's also elements of danger. Again, you're playing with celestial fire, and there's many degrees of that. And this is one of the ultimate ones. She's also seen as Queen Toloachi, very powerful sorcerer, and also, if people do work with her, it gives you more access to other plants and the underworld. Now we have Datura, also known as Jimson weed. Very powerful. She's my favorite flower, without a doubt. Her aroma is fantastic. Some people, she smells kind of like peanut butter. I'd say she smells kind of more fruity. She's also seen as a form of Queen Toloachi. And with this, so this is another way that a lot of practitioners would access dream states. Now, there's a lot of shamanic technology all over the world. Different shamans would have ways of communicating with each other. So before Twitter came along, how the fuck do you think these guys were communicating? A lot of the time it was through nightshade. They had a relationship with that. And I've been able to even to reproduce it, and some of my colleagues have, of where, say, we'll take certain doses of it, whether it's topically or internally, and go into dream states in the same house but on different parts of the house, in different states, whatever it is, and see if we can meet in the dream space. Take notes once we wake up and see if we can exchange information. This is exactly, not just through nightshade, but through a lot of herbs, how different curanderos and shamans are able to communicate. Because they're working through the dream space. It's the ultimate internet. I don't need VR. I don't need Neuralink. I already got everything I need. Everyone does. Here we have Iboga. Iboga is really powerful for what is most popular for these days, or most known for, is addiction, treating addiction. So if someone is strung out on heroin or opiates, what's fascinating about Iboga is it has a compound called ibogaine, and also has other alkaloids in there, so it's good to have a full spectrum. What's interesting about ibogaine is it binds to every single receptor site. Everything. It goes everywhere. That's why it's so effective with flushing and getting out of addiction. Some of my favorite experiences have been with it. It was very strange the first time I ate it. And this is from Africa. So the main nation that works with Iboga, or at least that's known to work with Iboga, is the Bwiti tribe. Really interesting music. So again, with all these temple ceremonies, there's always music, there's some form of dancing, and there's some form of aroma. Always, around the world. So those are the three most powerful forms of sorcery. Is scent, dancing, and music. Because you don't actually have to ingest those things in your mouth. You can just walk by it. You can't help it. It's just there. So it gets a little blurry with some of the consent line, which is where you want to have discernment with going into some of these containers. And just be aware of who you're having served this. With this is a very long journey. If you're taking a flood dose, it can be up to 3 days. And again, as we've talked about a little bit too, even if a journey is only 15 minutes, sometimes it can completely transcend time. So like time can kind of break in some of these things. So that's why some of the preparation with getting to know your subconscious more, doing the dream work can be very helpful. Give you some bearings so that you can land a little smoothie. We have Amanita Muscaria. Anyone here ever worked with Amanita Muscaria? Anyone familiar? Fantastic. So in this was used by a lot of my ancestors. This is our main go-to, and Nightshade and Acacia. They're kind of hardcore. But with Amanita Muscaria, that's also a great way to access the dream space. It's very hypnotic. You don't just want to eat it raw out of the ground. It has a bit of a preparation. You want to make sure to convert the ibotenic acid into muscimol and then consume it. But it can be like experiencing dreams within dreams within dreams. Dreamception, all the way down, which can be very powerful if you're wanting to do more lucid dream work. Get more prepared for that. A lot of people say it's poisonous. If you do eat the ibotenic acid, you can have a very uncomfortable vomitous experience. So I don't recommend that. Next one. And that is the end. So again, keep in mind with all of this, with temple practices, no matter what herb you work with, there's typically some type of an altar present that has a representation of the 4 or 5 forces that we talked about in the beginning. There's feathers, potentially. There can also be ebony staves or any other type of wood. There are all kinds of tools that you can use. But the main thing to keep in mind is that all you need is a floor and your intention and your prayer. It's also good to have water. And you can basically navigate anywhere as long as you have a good guide. There are lots of tools you can use. You can get really heady with crystals and all kinds of gemstones. You can work with all kinds of helper plants that help kind of smooth out the experience, whether that's putting rose oil on your body before you go into ayahuasca, or maybe you put some lavender oil on before you're working with mushrooms. Something to just make, put your body in the most comfortable space that it can be in before you leap into the unknown. Because anytime you take a psychedelic, you don't really know what's going to happen. And that's also why we're curious about it, right? There's a certain level of courage that comes with being willing to embrace the unknown in combination with that curiosity. So regardless of what experiences you guys have had already, I'm guessing there's quite a bit in this room, but I do want to commend you for just having some courage with this stuff, because it takes some guts to dive into this stuff sometimes. And of course, it can be beautiful and fun, and it also takes some courage and curiosity to see it through and to try something new and to potentially be willing to change your mind. Very powerful. So yeah, the keys are yours. We're open for Q&A. If you guys have any questions at all, if you want to talk about any specific type of herb, or if there's a way that you're working with, whether it's microdosing or bigger dosing, and if you have any questions about preparing for any specific sacrament, I'm happy to answer as best I can. and we'll go from there.